Well, good afternoon. It's good to have you here. Mr. Ambassador, distinguished guests, welcome to the White House. We are honored by your presence. We have among you international leaders such as the Ambassador of the United States from Rwanda. We have senior United States government officials. You'll hear from a number of them today. We have representatives not only of the White House, but HHS and State Department and USAID. We have researchers, the scholarly among you who put your analytical skills toward this problem and towards solutions. We have practitioners. We have church leaders. We have the media. We have a distinguished group. We also have a very diverse group, not only by way of vocation, as I just described, but we have those that would consider themselves on the left side of the political spectrum, those that consider themselves more on the right side. We have those with large organizations and small. We have varied interests that bring us to a place to acknowledge our common interest, because there are two things each of you hold very strongly that brought you in this room. One is a terrific burden for this very big problem, and the other is the terrific hope you have when you witness the problem being solved. And those two things, which we all share in common in this room, undergird this event, which is a part of a series that we call Compassion in Action. Every month at the White House, it's our privilege to convene a conversation like this, dealing with the scourge of AIDS that we're talking about today, HIV and AIDS, and malaria, which the First Lady helped us discuss in February, or dealing with the very difficult problems of prisoner reentry, the 700,000 prisoners that return to communities every year in the United States with a 2/3 rearrest rate, statistics tell us, or the 1/3 of our student population that drop out of high school before completion, 1/2 in the minority community, or so many that are addicted to drugs and captive to that lifestyle, and criminal justice intervention or clinical treatment programs are not able to help them out. So we take these terrible problems on once a month in this room with leaders in each of those issue spaces to be able to say, that's unacceptable. We ought to be able to do better than that as a society. To celebrate the fact that in America, a faith-based or community group is solving that problem someplace. And then third, which is our purpose in being here, is to say we can do better together. Government does better on behalf of those who hurt when we work with every willing partner. And when that's faith-based, we celebrate their faith as its public manifestation. If it's secular, we celebrate their heart and their effectiveness. And we realize that it does take all of us, but it does also take strategy and takes more effective structures to those partnerships. So we're going to have an event, a conversation today about those themes, but it is a part of a process that following this event will hopefully weave tighter our partnership relationship and some actual relationships that you'll meet among you today. And by way of the speakers and the organizations that they represent, hopefully a better understanding of the problem and what it takes for us to take on this giant called AIDS, which, as we know, has claimed already 20 million lives and some 30+ million afflicted with HIV, and the 5,000 or so a day. You'll hear these statistics throughout the day that die. This warrants our attention. This is indeed one of the greatest social problems of all time. And the president knows that, of course. And on November 30th, he recognized on the eve of World AIDS Day, a World AIDS Day event with Ambassador Dybel at a local church. The ambassador may speak to that. But the president wanted to say what I just said. This is a problem that demands our attention. And the local church is among the actors making a big difference. And he said this: when Americans witness suffering, they feel a duty to respond. Some are motivated by conscience and a conviction that America should use its great influence to be a force for good. Many others are driven by faith, by the call to love a neighbor as yourself, even when that neighbor may live on the other side of the world. This spirit of brotherhood and generosity has long defined our country. Over the past 6 years, we've rallied that spirit on behalf of this terrible disease, HIV and AIDS. Heather McLean is here, one of my colleagues in the initiative. She represents the United States Agency for International Development. And she told me about this 6-year journey in a personal way. She had friends that were missionaries for, I think, close to 20 years in Nigeria. They left, though, to return to the States in 2002. Their missions work in Nigeria served the prostitutes and their children and others to try and restore them to health. And so when they left Nigeria in 2002, they said goodbye to a lot of friends that they were quite confident they'd be saying goodbye to for the last time. But they had an opportunity to return to Nigeria last year, the year before. They met many of those friends because when they left, it was pre-PEPFAR. Now, post-PEPFAR, there's hope. There's life-saving therapies. You'll hear about this. Ambassador Dybel will detail that for you. But that's what we're all about today. We're going to recognize progress, and we're going to embolden ourselves to do more, which will indeed take all of us. Someone who knows that very well is going to serve as our first speaker, our keynote speaker. And I want to say on the front end a couple of things about Ambassador Hughes before I introduce her to you. One is that she is required to attend her own party at the State Department. That is a non-option. And so she is so gracious to join us on a day that is full of ceremony celebrating her service, and I'm going to say more about that in a moment. But I also want to acknowledge that we're going to need to usher her out soon after her remarks, and so you'll understand why that is the case. But Karen Hughes hardly needs an introduction because I know that you all know of her. Some of you know her personally quite well. But she is Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs at the State Department and has served in that role in her second tour of duty. And I don't know if today is literally the last day or if you're in your Friday is the technical last day. So we have a remarkable privilege today because we get to thank a very valuable public servant for her remarkable service. And I'm going to ask for a round of applause before I complete even her introduction. Because we know that you, like the President, realize that every human life is full of dignity. I suspect you may say that when you have the podium, but that's how you've led, and that's how you have served, and that's how you've represented our country. And I know that reflects the President's heart. It also, of course, reflects the best of America, so we are in your gratitude. I think it's also worth noting that when somebody as closely associated with the President as Karen Hughes, because the world leaders know she served him in Texas when he was governor, and she came to help build the White House staff and serve at his side in the first term of this administration. When she says this is what the President thinks and believes and is committed to, world leaders believe it because it comes from you. They know your relationship with him, and it's made a profound difference. So we are in your debt. We're grateful that you join us today, and I welcome you to the podium. Karen Hughes.
Well, thank you so much, Jay. When Jay called about this, I thought, well, it's a bad day because it's my farewell, and the President's actually coming over to say goodbye, and I thought, I really can't do that, and I thought I have to do this. This is something I'm passionate about, so I can't think of a better place to spend part of this important day than here with each of you. I see a lot of friends in the audience, Ambassador Dybel, Imam Hindi, who has traveled and done yeoman service for America, traveling the world to do outreach to Muslim communities across the world. Thank you for your leadership and your service. And Rick and Kay Warren, thank you so much to both of you for what you are doing and what your congregation is doing to save lives in Africa. This Action Roundtable is a reminder that what we do as both a nation and as individuals often speaks far more emphatically than what we say. It's especially true when our deeds result in concrete improvements in people's lives, especially in the areas that I have found people around the world care the most about. It doesn't matter where you live. People tend to care most about health, about education, and about economic opportunity. I call America's life-saving and life-changing actions the diplomacy of our deeds. And I believe this is public diplomacy at its finest, because what better way to reach out and establish relationships with people across the world than to act in ways that improve people's lives? President and Mrs. Bush's commitment to fighting HIV, AIDS, and our many other humanitarian efforts send the clear message that Americans care deeply about the lives of people across the world. After all, when you save the life of someone's child or someone's spouse, you've formed a strong and lasting human bond. These efforts harness and mobilize the collective compassion, and the great generosity of our country. They combined the tax dollars of American citizens with the expertise of our government agencies, with the contributions and passion of private foundations and individual citizens. They bring together research from our health institutions, the reach of private companies, and the hands and the hearts of the many volunteers of our faith-based and community organizations. History will show that President Bush and the American people are engaged in an unprecedented commitment to humanitarian causes, from fighting HIV/AIDS to educating children, to providing shelter and health care after disasters, to feeding the hungry in some of the world's most difficult places. The United States of America leads the world in the fight against AIDS, providing more resources to the global HIV/AIDS response than the rest of the world's donor nations combined. President Bush's emergency plan for AIDS relief, known as PEPFAR, is directing $15 billion over 5 years for HIV prevention, treatment, and care. And President Bush has asked Congress to reauthorize PEPFAR for an additional 5 years and a total of $30 billion. The fight against malaria also means that 15 countries in Africa will receive an infusion of expertise and an additional $1.2 billion to prevent and treat malaria. The result is the opportunity to reduce the number of deaths by half in each of these African countries. Now, it weighs on my conscience that that malaria is a preventable and treatable disease that kills thousands of children a day. Think of that. We used to have malaria in America, and we've managed to wipe it out, but it's still rampant in many countries around the world. It's preventable and it's treatable, so we have the power to change those statistics, and we're working to do just that. Now, these efforts are unprecedented, but they're not unique. I find, however, that too few of our fellow Americans and even fewer people across the world know of the scope and the extent of our humanitarian efforts. Last fall, I was invited to speak at a governor's conference in California, and I summarized a variety of these diplomacy of deeds projects that we're engaged in across the world, and from business mentoring for women in developing countries to training for nearly 1 million teachers in 20 different countries, scholarships for 500,000 girl students in Africa so they can go to school, the first breast cancer prevention and treatment health initiative in the Middle East, and now expanded to Latin America. And I went through a series of these, and at the end, Eunice Shriver, the mother of California's First Lady, Maria Shriver, raised her hand and she said, "Why don't we know about this? Why don't we ever hear about any of this?" One quick answer, I think, is that bad news tends to unfortunately crowd out good deeds. And although it's clearly more complicated than that, I like to say that a bombing gets a lot more attention than the opening of a school, even though 10 years down the road, the opening of the school may prove to have been the far more significant event. Across the world, America feeds the poor, educates the illiterate, cares for the sick, and responds to disasters. We support so many different development projects, I find, that we sometimes get very little credit for any of them. And in this time of war, of course, good news is sometimes overshadowed by the somber news of loss. It's certainly understandable that our national attention is focused on our vital mission in Iraq and Afghanistan and the need to confront the ongoing threat of violent extremism. And yet, in this season especially of giving and goodwill, it's vitally important to remind ourselves and the world that America is actively engaged in what I call waging peace by working to build relationships and improve people's lives. Americans reach out to help people in need because of who we are and what we believe. After all, if we truly believe our founding conviction that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if we truly believe that, then that is something to be hoarded. Not to be hoarded, but to be shared. Those rights are something that we feel for everyone in our world. We believe that all people are equal and each person is uniquely valuable. And these convictions prompt us to act in our world. And when the people of the world see Americans in action, they respond. I was struck that after the Navy hospital ship Mercy went back to Southeast Asia, to neighborhoods that were ravaged by the tsunami in late 2004, and polls showed the favorable opinion of the United States rose dramatically. When earthquakes devastated Pakistan and we sent American military helicopters to Russian emergency supplies, the Chinook helicopter quickly became one of the most popular toys in Pakistan. Little boys all wanted to play with them, and the opinions of America rose dramatically. As part of expanded outreach to our neighbors in our own hemisphere, we recommended that President Bush deploy the U.S. hospital ship Comfort to provide health care to tens of thousands of people in 12 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean last summer. And I visited the ship in Peru, and it was a wonderful example of a public-private partnership. Here, the Navy was operating the ship. It was staffed by a lot of volunteer medical professionals from America. And I have to tell you, we all walk by the collection bins, and we see people gathering food for the hungry. But to see eyeglasses that had been donated in drugstores across America being distributed to people who otherwise would not be able to see in Peru was truly just one of the great moments of my life, to witness this and realize that a little boy was getting eyeglasses that he otherwise would not have because someone at some drugstore in some small town in America had been generous enough to donate a pair of glasses. And so it was a wonderful experience to see the love and the heart of those volunteers coming together with the resources of that naval hospital ship. And President Saka of El Salvador said, and I quote, "This type of diplomacy really touched the heart and the soul of the country and the region." In the case of disaster relief, like the response to the tsunami and earthquake, America's efforts are focused and therefore very highly visible. Less well known, though, are the smaller things that we do virtually every day. For example, America is by far the largest donor of food to the people of Darfur, where we've supplied more than half of the emergency food aid from the entire world. Since 2005, we have spent $1.2 billion feeding the hungry there. The U.S. is the leading provider of bilateral aid to the Palestinian people. And when I used to say this around the world, people would say, "Oh no, when Hamas took over, you cut it off." No, we continued to provide aid to the people. We no longer gave money to the government, but we continued to provide aid directly to the people. Since 2002, we've obligated $1.8 billion in assistance for the Palestinian people, provided through USAID and the UN Relief and Works Agency. Last year alone, we provided approximately $154 million in food assistance, education, health, and social services for Palestinians. The U.S. also provided $50 million through USAID for basic human needs, democracy and civil society, and private sector development. We are, and few people again recognize this, the U.S. is the largest donor to the United Nations World Food Program. Since 2003, roughly $1.2 billion annually in food aid, leading the fight against the #1 risk to human health, hunger. These people-to-people programs deliver both life and hope and a more positive view of our country. I've talked with women in our literacy programs in Morocco who express deep gratitude that for the first time in their lives they can go to the store and read the labels and they can help their children with their homework. And the pride as they talked about being able to have new stature in the eyes of their children was really striking. I remember asking a young man in one of our literacy English language teaching classes what difference it had made in his life that he learned English. And he said, "I have a job and none of my friends do." Now, that young man came from the same neighborhood in Casablanca, Morocco, that produced the suicide bombers. And I believe that in addition to having a job, he now has a hope and a reason to live rather than kill himself and others in a suicide bombing. A Somali mother who was almost reduced to begging told us that our Food for Work program there not only saved her life, but also restored her dignity. At this time of year, when people are called to care for the hungry, the sick, and the abandoned, Americans should know that we are giving the gift of hope to thousands of people whose names we may not know. And I will continue to advocate that we do even more because I believe the diplomacy of deeds serves both our own national interests and the people of every nation. Your work against HIV/AIDS is the leading example of American compassion in action around the world. It's life-saving, life-changing, and nothing could be more important. Someone made the point to me the other day that America's greatest export isn't a product or a service, it's hope. And that is what your work is offering people around the world every day. I'll never forget visiting a hospice in a very poor neighborhood in South Africa where patients were dying of AIDS. And there, holding their hand, was a young American woman in her early 20s. She'd given a year of her life to go and just be there because she wanted to do something to help. That young woman and each of you share the very best of our great country with the world every day. So I really wanted to come and thank you for what you do, and encourage you in what you do, and let you know how very important it is in explaining to the world exactly who we are as a country and as a people. So thank you all so much for everything you do, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Undersecretary. Thank you so much for those fine words. Enjoy your celebration this afternoon. Next, continuing in our keynote portion of today's event is Rick and Kay Warren. First I'll introduce Rick, and then I'll introduce Kay, who I think will be then speaking first. Rick Warren is a lot of things to a lot of people. He is author of the best-selling hardback, the most best-selling hardback in American history. Published in 50 languages, it was the best-selling book in the world for 3 years. He's a global strategist in demand in such places as the World Economic Forum in Davos and the United Nations General Assembly and august venues such as the Council on Foreign Relations and, of course, the White House. Dinner guest and strategist with people like Bill Gates and Bono. I don't know about Angelina Jolie or if that would be approved, but I know those other two. But more important than that, he is pastor of a local church and shepherd of a flock. Even more important than that, he's husband to Kay and father and grandfather. He's also a friend. Delighted to have him here. And while he's a household name, many of you know Rick, perhaps not as many of you know Kay Warren. But if you care about this disease and you care about doing something about it, you know Kay Warren. And you know the difference she has made in the modern era of tackling this terrible giant head on. Kay Warren helped her husband. He co-founded Saddleback Church and was a part of that very small group years ago, 1980, I think, when it was founded, that is now a church that will host some 40,000 probably on the weekend services over the Christmas holiday. That local church is a rather large one, and she's a life source to that congregational life. But she's also a conscience at that church, and she's a voice for the vulnerable, for Saddleback's outreach, and now on a larger national stage. As a 2-time cancer survivor, and someone who's worked in the fields, who has held suffering in the palm of her hand, she knows of which she speaks. And she's put that story in a book, hopefully she'll tell us about, Dangerous Surrender, which I commend to all of you. Specific to today's event, though, she also helped launch something in 2005, I think was the first session, was the HIV/AIDS Summit at Saddleback, which was a summit for the church. It's now grown over the past several years to be one of the most important events to consider what this issue is all about. I've been privileged to attend the past couple of years. And for people like Rick and Kay that travel the world, many come back with photographs of themselves riding camels and fine art. They collect all these remarkable things from their world travels. Rick and Kay Warren collect ideas, they collect resources, and they collect relationships. And that's what you see when you go to one of these summits. You get world leaders like first ladies or presidents of countries and international leaders from the United Nations and elsewhere. But you see people who have worked in the field and figured out a new solution on disease prevention or treatment or care to the least, the last, and the lost. It is a stunning accomplishment. Elizabeth Stife, you do so much, and Larry Smith to help them pull that off. It is remarkable. We don't have that much for you today. We have a bit of the Global Summit in a box because we have remarkable speakers. But that's how much passion they have for this issue, and that's how much authentic leadership they're delivering. So we are also in your debt, and I'm delighted, Kay Warren, to introduce you to the podium.
Well, in 2002, I became a seriously disturbed woman. In a flash, in an instant, my entire life changed when I picked up a magazine that had an article about AIDS in Africa. And in the amount of time it took to read that article, my entire world turned upside down. I realized that a global pandemic had been growing underneath my nose, and I had not even noticed it. When I read that article and discovered that there were millions, multiple millions of people infected with HIV in the world, and that there were multiplied millions of children who were orphaned, and when I came to the point that I realized I didn't know a single one of them, I didn't know anyone who was infected, I didn't know a single orphan, it shocked me, and it horrified me, and it riveted me, because I began to think, what is wrong with me that I don't know this? How can there be a problem that is so vast in our world and it have nothing to do with me, that it not touch me in the slightest way? What's wrong with me? And it sent me on a search. to try and figure out what it was that I was supposed to do about that, because it became very clear that I was not just reading an article as an intellectual exercise, that I was reading that article that day and it was grabbing my heart and my mind for a reason, that it had something very personal to do with me and that I was to be involved. But I had no idea what that was to look like. Absolutely none. I was ignorant. I was misinformed. What I did know about HIV was wrong. I had to go back and relearn things that I thought I knew. I had to talk to experts and become educated. What I did do pretty quickly was form a small task force at our church of people who were interested in HIV. And at that time, there weren't very many. There were just a handful. I would mention it to some people, and some would turn away from me in horror that I would even be talking about HIV. But there were a few, like Elizabeth that Jay mentioned, who resonated instantly and said, "You care about HIV? I do too. Let's start talking together." And so a small task force was formed at our church. And then very soon after that, I was invited in January of 2003 to this room. So it's really emotional to me. Because here I was, a complete novice, a newbie who knew nothing. All I had was a broken heart and a conviction that somehow I, as a believer in Jesus Christ, and my church were to be involved in caring for people with HIV. And so I walked through that door over there, and my eyes were as big as saucers. My palms were sweaty. I couldn't believe I was at a White House event. I mean, how cool and weird and terrifying is that? And the first person I saw was Franklin Graham sitting near the back row. And I had met Franklin once, and it was like, oh, a familiar face, somebody I can say hello to. And so I reintroduced myself to Franklin, and he, with great surprise, said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "That's a really good question, because I'm not really sure what I'm doing here. All I know is that God has laid it on my heart, has showed me clearly that I am to be caring for people with HIV, and I am to help my church to do that. And Franklin, I'm looking for models. We're so new at this. Can you tell us some models? Can you point me to some churches who have a ministry right now in their church to people in their community who are HIV positive, who are taking care of people in their church and their community, and at the same time care about people around the world with HIV?" And he thought for a few moments, and he thought really hard, and he paused and he said, "I can't think of a single one. You be the model." And it was a moment in which I sank back into my chair and thought, okay, that's it. That's the task ahead. We must become a model. We must become a model for others who are seeking how to minister to the people in their own communities who are HIV positive, how to be involved with prevention, how to be involved with care, support, and how we can also at the same time have our hearts completely engaged with people around the world who are also seeking to minister to people in their community with HIV/AIDS. And so from there it began to grow, and we formed the HIV/AIDS initiative, and this little task force expanded into something that suddenly we were traveling around the world and learning and experiencing and meeting the local AIDS services providers in our own community. And people in our church began to raise their hand and say, first anonymously, anonymous phone calls, "I have HIV, but I don't want to meet you yet because I'm not really sure that you're going to accept me." And then as time began to grow, people would stand in our pulpit and give testimonies of being HIV positive and what life was like, and give a view to our church of what it meant to live with HIV. And it began to expand, and I went to the International AIDS Conference in Bangkok, the first one I went to. You talk about shocked. I didn't know the lingo, I didn't know the language, I didn't know what they were talking about, and I walked around and got very discouraged because it seemed even bigger than I had had even the tiniest glimpse of. And I started to think there's nothing we can do. There's nothing my church can do that can make a dent in a problem that is a pandemic that spans the globe, that carries so much stigma, that decimates families, that leaves children without parents. There is nothing I know to do about this. Very discouraged. But 2 years later, when I went back to Toronto, to the International AIDS Conference in Toronto, this time my head was high, and I walked through the halls with a smile on my face, and you could say, "What was the matter with you? Was anything better? Had the numbers gone down of people infected? No. Were there any fewer orphans? No. Was there anything really dramatically different in those 2 years?" And in one sense, you could say, no, in fact, it's worse. But here's the difference. In those 2 years, I had come to believe with all of my heart that the church is the missing link, that government has a role to play that only government can do, and Rick will talk about this in a minute, that private sector, the business community, has things that only it can do, but there is a role for faith-based organizations that is the missing link, that actually becomes the delivery system for all the wonderful things we so long to provide for people with HIV, and not just around the world, but in our own communities. The church is the missing link. And so I walked through Toronto with a gigantic smile on my face. That smile has not left, even though many times there are tears coursing down my cheeks as I weep for my brothers and sisters and for the children who are infected in my church, in my community, in my country, and in my world. But at the same time, I have such hope. This is something we can stop AIDS. That is not a pipe dream. It's not something that only for the newbies and the naive people like me 4 years ago who would have such an audacious goal, but it is the goal that I believe. It is what I'm giving my life for. It is what I believe we can do when there is a partnership with government, with business, and the churches. Rick has a really, this is something I could talk about for days and hours, so I'm going to stop and I'm going to let Rick share with you from what we really are convinced about what the church can do. But thank you so much for the opportunity to just be in this room today, reaffirming to you in ways that I didn't know even 4 years ago. We can do it. We can do it. We cannot do it by ourselves. We must link arms and do it together. PEPFAR is a huge portion of that, but we must do in our own country what we are doing in other countries as well. This is something that is at home and abroad, but we are together in this. Thank you so much for the opportunity to just talk for a few moments.
Dear friends, I am so proud of you. It says a whole lot more about you than it does any of the speakers who are here today, because there are thousands of people who didn't come to this meeting. But the fact that you're here means you care. You care. And that's what matters most. What matters is the love behind what you do. Now, we come here today from all different kinds of backgrounds, all different kinds of beliefs, ethnic groups, religious groups, non-religious groups. But if you care, I am your friend. If you care about ending AIDS, I am your partner. There's some problems that are so big in the world, they cannot be stopped by any one single group. They have to be team tackled. When a football player is so big, he can't be stopped by a lineman. You have to take him down with everybody working together. And it doesn't matter what your background is. Nobody's saying, are you Republican or Democrat or Muslim or Mormon or Buddhist or Baptist or right or left or whatever. They say, we just need to take this down. And that's why I came here today, to talk to you about partnership, about collaboration, about cooperation in saving lives. If I'm driving down the freeway and I see somebody who's been in an accident on the side of the road, and they're laying there dying and they're bleeding to death, and I walk up to them, my first question is, how can I help you? It's not, was this your fault? How did you get hurt? Did you cause it? Those questions are irrelevant. If I'm in the hospital and I have a heart attack because I'm overweight, I don't want somebody to come in and say, oh, Rick, been eating too many hamburgers, huh? Your cholesterol's high. No, I want them to care for me and comfort me and help me. And the main thing to do is you just help a person. Now, if there's somebody laying on the side of the road or a family laying on the side of the road and they're bleeding to death, and I can't get them into the car by myself to get them to the hospital, I'm not going to ask when somebody comes up to help, are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you straight? Are you gay? Are you a Buddhist or Hindu or Christian or Muslim? Or I'm going to say, will you help? We have some lives to save here. That is the kind of people in this room right now. And so I'm proud of you. We have to do this together. One drop of rain cannot do anything, but 1,000,000 drops of rain together can turn a desert into a garden. And, you know, Jesus took 12 men and turned the world upside down. Lenin once said, give me 100 dedicated men and I'll change the world. He nearly did. He nearly did. It doesn't take a lot of people, it just takes conviction. And when I look down here and I see Ambassador James Camonio, dear friend, Ambassador Mark Dybel, dear friend, Director Jay Hine, dear friend, and so many others of you who, Shepard and Anita and others who have been serving in this battle longer than I am, say thank you. The church was late to the table in this issue, and we have repented of that, but we are here to stay. This is not flavor of the week for me. This is a long-term battle, the eradication of HIV/AIDS. I was speaking at Davos a couple years ago at the World Economic Forum, and I kept hearing people talk about you need public and private partnerships to solve big issues like poverty and disease and illiteracy and trafficking and corruption and all the things that we're doing in a thing called the Peace Plan. And when I heard them talk about partnership, they were really talking about public and private. They meant business and government needs to get together. And we need to solve it. Listen, if business and government alone could solve the problems of the world, we would have solved it 50 years ago. Because they've been working together for a long time. You have to have the third leg of the stool. A one-legged stool will fall over. And a two-legged stool will fall over. For there to be stability, you have to have at least 3 legs to make a stool stand. And the missing leg of the stool in the battle against AIDS has been this, right here. Faith-based and community initiative. That's the missing leg of the stool. It's government, it's business, it's houses of worship. I like to say it's public, it's profit, and it's parishes. It takes all 3 legs. And as Kay mentioned, each leg has something to offer in this ending of this pandemic that the other can't do. There are things only government can do. There are things only business can do. But there are things only houses of worship can do that government and business will never be able to do. In government has certain responsibilities. It has agenda-setting abilities. It has permission-giving abilities. There are some churches, some countries I work in, it's very difficult because of the government. There are others I can work in, it's very easy because of the government. And so they can set national priorities. And when President Bush said, we're going after this thing, and to the tune of $15 billion in PEPFAR, and then a few years later said, we're going after malaria. Malaria. 500 million people will get malaria this year. That's a disease we figured out the cure for how to prevent 100 years ago during Teddy Roosevelt's administration. Why do we still have it today? Because we don't have leaders who say enough's enough. We're not going to go another year with this. And we have to say that with AIDS, enough's enough. We're just not going to allow this to go on another generation. And government has many roles that are important to it. Business brings things to the agenda that only business could do. Business brings capital. Business brings investment. Business brings health expertise in pharmaceuticals and medical care and all kinds of things like that. And business brings management skills. Because most governments and most churches and most houses of worship and most businesses are poorly managed. So they have things they bring to the table that others don't have. Churches and houses of worship bring to the table a number of things that business and government will never, ever have, and they won't solve this issue, the problem of AIDS, without you and without me. Right now, there are about 16 million Jewish people in the world. There are 600 million Buddhists. There are 800 million Hindus. There are 1 billion Muslims. There are 2.3 billion Christians. most of the world has some kind of faith. In fact, the actual number of people without faith, secular people, is actually quite small outside of Europe and Manhattan. Most people have some kind of faith that they adhere to. And if you say, well, wait a minute, we can't have people of faith at the table in solving the issue of AIDS, you have just ruled out most of the world. And if you say you have to put your faith on the table in order for you to do humanitarian care for the sick and the poor and all the others, then you have just ruled out, as I said, the vast majority of people. Let me give you an example of this. President Bush asked me to be the closing speaker last December at the International Conference Global Summit on Malaria. And I brought a pastor from James's country, from Rwanda, and I said, let me just show you an example of why you will never be able to solve malaria without the church. And I said, let me just show you 3 PowerPoint slides. And I said, here's the first slide of the western province of Rwanda. There are about 700,000 people in western Rwanda. And for this entire area, there are only 3 hospitals. So that means it's a 2 days walk to the nearest hospital. And I showed where the 3 hospitals were. 2 of these hospitals are faith-based hospitals. They're actually Christian hospitals. And one of them is a government hospital. So if you didn't have Christian or faith-based hospitals, you'd only have 1 hospital for that many people, 700,000. It's 2 days walk up and down a mountain to get to the hospital. I said, now, let me show you the clinics. And I put up slide number 2. 700,000 people. Here are the 18 clinics for this region. Now, a clinic could mean simply a shelf with a bottle of aspirin on it. They're not fully stocked clinics. But 16 of these clinics are faith-based. They're actually Christian clinics, and 2 of them are government-based. So it's about a day's walk to get to the nearest clinic. Now, even still, if you're sick, you don't want to walk an entire day to get medicine. That's a long way. So now watch this. I put up the 3rd slide. I said, and it was covered with dots all over the province. Here are the 726 churches in this province. If you are sick, where would you like to go to get your ARVs? After it was over, Melinda Cates, who was sitting on the front row, came up to me. She says, I get it. The church is a distribution center. I said, oh, it's far more than a distribution center. The church has 4 things that government and business will never have. And when I say church, you can translate this. If you're Muslim, think mosque. If you're Jewish, think temple, or Buddhist, whatever. Just you think your house of worship. I'm a pastor, so I'm talking in terms of churches. But I said, for instance, I could take you to 10 million villages around the world. The only thing in it is a church. They don't have a clinic. They don't have a school. If you don't believe that, just travel. I did 46,000 miles around the world in 45 days last year. And I could take you to 10 million villages. The only thing in it is a church. The church was global 200 years before anybody started talking about globalization. In fact, it is the only truly global organization in the world. You get outside of the capital, there isn't business. There isn't government. There aren't NGOs. But there's a church. There's a temple. There's a mosque. And so it has universal distribution. Second thing, we have the biggest army of volunteers. Hundreds of millions of people volunteer through their congregation to help their community every week. If all the social services done by houses of worship in America was stopped in America tomorrow night, within a month we'd go bankrupt in this country. The government could not afford all the soup kitchens, the counseling, and everything else that's done free by houses of worship across America. Nothing comes close. Let me just put this in perspective. This weekend in just Christian churches, 150 million people will go to church this weekend. That's more people in church on one weekend than attend an entire year of all professional sports in America. All professional sports. I'm not talking about watching on TV, getting out and going to a football game or baseball game. More on one weekend than all sports in an entire year. It is an unawakened giant waiting to be mobilized. We have the most distribution, we have the most volunteers, we have local credibility. Because when you're in that village, the people trust that priest, that imam, that rabbi, that pastor, that minister, far more than they trust any government official. Far more than they trust any business person, or far more than they trust any NGO coming in from the outside. Why? Because that person is sleeping in the same blankets as the villagers. They're marrying, they're burying, they're caring for them, they're showing love, they're there when they're sick, they're there in all of the major stages and seasons of life, and the people trust that. And if you want to go in and get a village to do AIDS testing and everybody get tested, you better get permission from the gatekeepers and get them behind it. And if they say, yeah, then I've pastored the church I'm in for 27 years. I know my community better than any politician, better than any businessman. Why? I've been listening to their problems for 27 years. And I've been walking through their divorces and their miscarriages and every other problem in life for 27 years. And so we have that credibility. And I believe that what it's going to take is people saying, we don't have to agree on everything to work together on the thing we do agree on. Let's get business, let's get government, let's get churches and mosques and synagogues and everybody else who say, I'll help you get the people to the hospital. And let's save lives. God bless you.
Terrific. Thank you both for those terrific words. It's an ideal framing for today's conversation. Karen Hughes talked about America being best understood and best perceived when the diplomacy of our deeds lead, when our values are turned into action. And Rick and Kay have talked about the social sector, the faith-based and community organizations that comprise our finest form of compassion. That is indeed why the President formed the Faith-Based and Community Initiative. It is a problem-solving engine. It's trying to harness that which Tocqueville first saw as America's unique strength. When he visited us in the 1830s and he talked about how an American, when he sees someone in distress, doesn't place a call to a local official, but instead responds to that need, has grown. That early observation, which was a part of our early character, has now grown to a social sector comprised of 1.5 million nonprofit organizations whose combined revenue and assets would make our nonprofit sector the 6th largest economy in the world if it was a separate country. The amount of money that Americans give through their philanthropy is larger than the gross domestic product of all of our Western allies. It's a big deal. It's a lot of assets and resources. We attempt to mobilize that on behalf of the least, the last, and the lost, and also the world's hardest to solve problems. And Ambassador Mark Dybel knows that well, and he governs that way. The architect is a term used for someone else in this administration in popular press. Mark Dybel was an architect of what we're here to discuss today, because before his very distinguished public leadership role now, he was in a very important other government role at a table, sleeves rolled up, thinking through how do we take a whole lot of money, how do we win a whole lot of money, and take those dollars and invest it well, not only so that we can do good today, but that we can even maybe solve this problem so that tomorrow it's a lot easier to manage. And a couple of big ideas that he's responsible for and we're in his debt for is that he thought it's worth investing locally. It's worth investing in those leaders that will be operating these programs. So we need to work with host governments in a way that's honoring to them and transfers power and authority. And so focus countries become part of the strategy. And he wants to engage new partners when the law is being written. So there's an 8% cap on who can receive dollars to enable the United States government to reach out and find out not only new partners, but smaller partners that haven't done business with us before. So today, 83% of PEPFAR's grantees, I think that's correct, Ambassador, are indigenous organizations. Well, they have the local control you're talking about, Pastor, and they're the ones that will stay. And if they're now equipped and resourced to do it on their own, that can give us hope that we will be moving forward with an investment that will receive a return, not just a program that we will pull up stakes and later depart from and create a void. So I'm not going to give his speech, I'll let him give it, but let me offer now a more formal bio of the ambassador. Mark Dybel is U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator, which carries the rank of ambassador. He's responsible for leading implementation of the largest government effort ever pointed at a single disease, and that is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief. He comes to us from a unique pathway. He did his studies first, actually, as a Wisconsin high schooler at the same time I was a Wisconsin high schooler. He was in the big city, I was in a rural area. But then he did his formal studies across the river at Georgetown University, which is known for its School of Foreign Service, of course. He decided not to go to the School of Foreign Service and become a diplomat. Instead, he wanted to be a doctor, and he wanted to care for patients. And so in the spirit of God having, I guess, a very good sense of humor, he becomes a doctor. He treats patients. You'll see in his formal bio, he held many important public health positions, but now he's a very important diplomat. And he is also projecting the face that Karen Hughes talked about in a profound and very special way. So I'd like to welcome my friend to the podium, Ambassador Dybel.
Good afternoon, everyone. You know, I used to think Jay was my friend until he put me speaking behind Kay and Rick. It wasn't very nice. It's great to be here with Kay and Rick. They really do model, and Kay talked about how she needed to be the model. Well, we couldn't have asked for more. They've certainly met that call with great dignity and compassion. Jay also gave me another difficult job, which was in a very small, bounded time, effectively express the boundless compassion and generosity of the American people and the boundless compassion, dedication, talent of the people in the countries we're so privileged to serve, because that's what the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief is actually all about. It is a boundless effort in many ways. I think we're thinking a lot about, you know, where does PEPFAR fit in the history of public health? And when you think about it, it fits really among the most extraordinary things ever for two reasons. One is its size, and the other is its scope. In size, as has been mentioned, it's the largest international health initiative in history ever dedicated to a single disease. That's a rather extraordinary statement. I'm told right now it's actually the largest development initiative in the world for anything. But it's not just about money. It's about saving lives, as we've heard over and over again. So it had very specific goals: to support treatment for 2 million people, to support care, compassionate care for 10 million, including orphans and vulnerable children, and importantly, support the prevention of 7 million new infections, because ultimately we don't want anything that could cause an orphan, and we don't want to have to treat people. We don't want them to get infected to begin with. And this, if you put it in context, when the president announced this, only 50,000 people in all of sub-Saharan Africa were receiving treatment, 50,000. And that 7 million infections averted is actually a projected 60% reduction in the expected new infections. So in size and scope, this is extraordinary. I think the last thing that I think about mostly these days is it's the first time ever, the development community has committed itself to tackling a chronic disease. The first time ever. And that imposes a lot of requirements and a lot of things on us to be with this for the long haul, to walk with our brothers and sisters globally for the long term, to build the health systems that are necessary to reach people in order to solve this problem. And ultimately, I think the vision, the president's vision here, which he always says, it's extraordinary. I've never seen him speak about his humanitarian efforts without saying, to whom much is given, much is required. This all begins with that fundamental impulse: to whom much is given, much is required. We cannot achieve these extraordinary goals. We cannot achieve what we've done and what he's asked us to do in size and scope and global health unless we meet people where they are, unless we get to people where they are. And as Rick pointed out, in sub-Saharan Africa and many of the places we work, and in the United States, where people are often is in their community and in their church. They're not often in a government building. In fact, they tend to avoid them at all costs. Which means if we're going to achieve these goals, if we're going to get people to save lives, we need to work with the organizations that are in the community and where the people are, including the churches. All we have to do is look at the numbers. You know, the World Health Organization came up with this. This isn't from us. The World Health Organization estimates that 30 to 70% of health care in Africa is provided by faith-based organizations. How are you going to achieve these ambitious goals if you don't engage faith-based organizations, if 30 to 70% of the health care is there? There's no estimate on this, but for palliative care, for compassionate home-based care, for orphan care, I would bet 90 to 95% is provided by the community and the faith-based organizations, because governments, particularly in the developing world, haven't been able to get to those areas. And so it is almost all the community and faith-based organizations. And importantly, if you think about prevention, what we're fundamentally talking about is human behavior changing. And human behavior doesn't change when a government official tells someone to change their behavior. Believe me, we try. Human behavior changes when someone who is in the community, who is trusted by the community, works with you from age 5 through the rest of your life and walks with you in your many parts of your journey to help you change your behavior. And so how are we going to do that unless we engage the people in the community and the faith-based organizations? We're not. And so that's why the emergency plan focuses on these groups, the faith and community-based organizations, as part of including government and non-governmental organizations. It actually is a development agenda that was put forward in the Monterey Consensus, a nice formal sounding diplomatic thing, that we have to work with everyone if we're going to achieve these goals. And as Jay pointed out, that's why 83% of our partners are local organizations. That's why 22% of our partners are faith-based organizations, because we're not going to get to people where they are. We're not going to achieve these ambitious goals. We are not going to turn the tide against HIV unless we do. Shepard Smith is here. His group did an independent evaluation, and our funding for faith-based organizations went from about 10% in 2005 to about 23% in 2007 by the estimates that they did. And so, but the reason that we have to do that is we're not going to succeed if we don't. We've taken some steps to ensure that we are reaching people where they are, that we are supporting the communities where they are, including government, non-government, faith-based organizations. And so Jay mentioned we have an 8% cap on how much any one organization can achieve in any country. It's not because we don't want people to get money, it's because we think a lot of people need to get money, that a lot of different organizations need to get resources. The one exception to that is an umbrella organization, someone who pulls together all those community organizations and provides the managerial and other support that is so, we understand, burdensome on behalf of the US government. We've actually inserted into all of our grants now, and it took us 2 years with the lawyers to do this, requiring every organization who receives money from us, international organization, to turn over what they're doing to a local organization over the life of that grant. That's an extraordinary act, actually, an extraordinary act of faith in the people and trust in the people whom we serve. And we have the New Partners Initiative. President Bush launched the New Partners Initiative on 3 World AIDS Days ago. It's a $200 million initiative. The following World AIDS Day, he met with the first grantees of the New Partners Initiative, and this World AIDS Day, he met with some more local organizations, which gives you a sense of the importance of the New Partners Initiative here to the president and what really is within his heart. And Mrs. Bush has participated in all of those. So far, through 2 rounds, we have 36 new partners. Nearly half of them are faith-based organizations. More than 70% of them are faith and community-based organizations. And here's an important one. Nearly a third of them were sub-partners and are now prime partners. And that's what we need to be going towards, building the capacity and creating that local capacity so that they can ultimately be the prime recipients. I'm not going to say a lot more than that because we actually have people who can talk a lot more eloquently. We've already heard a bunch of them, and you're going to hear a bunch more. All I would say is that what we're fundamentally doing in PEPFAR, what we're fundamentally doing in this largest initiative in the history of public health globally, is to support legions of heroes and angels on the ground where the American people reach out and we are reached back to touch hand to hand and heart to heart across vast distances. We support people who see suffering and misery and hold it in the palm of their hands. But they cannot carry their people themselves, for the load is too heavy. And so we must walk with them. We will walk with them. And we will achieve the president's goals. Because, as President Bush so often says, to whom much is given, much is required. And now I have the great privilege to introduce one of those heroes, Ambassador James Kimonyo from Rwanda. I think everyone knows Rwanda is one of the leaders in the fight against HIV/AIDS. Some people may not know that the ambassador was governor of a province before he came to this post. And so he was in the community and of the community, working there, saving lives and contributing to the peace and security which his country has at this point. And it's been a great privilege getting to know him, and I'm very honored to introduce someone who has become a friend and whom I look forward to getting to know even better, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Ambassador Mark. And let us refresh with East African accent after listening to the most eloquent individuals who have spoken. And maybe I would say, when I received the invitation to come and speak today, when I looked at the speakers, I saw two names that I know. Pastor Rick Warren and his wife, Mrs. K. And I said to myself that I was not going to speak about this issue than they do, because of the virtue of the fact that I had attended the conference in California, the Global AIDS Summit that was convened at Saddleback Church in California, the conference which taught all of us a lesson. And lesson number one was to be disturbed by the problem. And the first day of the conference, when I went back to my hotel, I got disturbed. I realized that whatever I have done in terms of supporting my people when I was a governor is nothing. The challenges are enormous. The challenges are threatening. And the situation is getting worse. And when I try to figure out what is my contribution, I realize that I'm doing nothing. Since that day, I've been thinking about what can I do as an individual, not from the perspective of being an ambassador. As an individual, am I trying to do my little contribution in terms of supporting people who are suffering? And I think this is the challenge Saddleback has brought to most of us. They say, we recognize your role, we recognize that you are government, we recognize that you are private sector, we recognize your incredible contribution towards saving the lives of the people, but we need to form partnership. And in my understanding, it is the essence of this conference, of this gathering. But before going further, let me take this opportunity on behalf of my government to express my sincere thanks and extend my appreciation to the government of the United States for the support that they have extended to our government since after the horrible atrocities that took place in our country, and more specifically in the area of health and governance. The 2003 announcement that was made by His Excellency President George W. Bush, I would say the life-saving announcement, the PEPFAR, is not another program. It's a government action that reflects the passion, reflects the conviction, the decision that reflects the dedication and serious leadership for the people. When I came to this country just 5 months ago, I had an opportunity on 25th of July to present my credentials. For those who have been in diplomacy, they know what it means to present credentials. And I have presented credentials to about 9 heads of state in the world. And I'm expecting to present to 4 more. But my experience with the White House, the presidents of this country, it is the only occasion when I was given an opportunity to come with the whole of my family and my small children. And I was told that I was not going to make any political statement. And I was informed, reliably informed by White House, that the president was not going to make any statement either. What he wanted is time with the children. That shows passion. That shows passion demonstrated through such kind of international diplomacy. This is the only country that extends that invitation to diplomats. And I'm happy to say that when I went to details of my report and learned of what this government is doing, it is because of the strong and committed leadership. And I really wanted to take this opportunity to thank the government and the president himself. You may read from whatever literature that you have access to. When this announcement was made, only about 50,000 people had access to antiretroviral treatment. And after the announcement, today, almost 4 years after, this program is saving more than 1.4 million people in the world. Rwanda had 0. We're now talking about more than 40,000 people receiving the drugs. And the program is continuing, as you heard from the speeches. The government is scaling up, and there's a very serious commitment to continue increasing that support. What else can you do of any importance to any community besides life-saving? But Pastor Rick has continuously reminded people that even though it takes conviction, but it also takes, I'm sorry, I had a written speech here of about 4 pages, but I realized that everything is spoken about and it's going to be very irrelevant. So, but he reminded that it takes, yes, conviction, but it takes, on a serious note, it takes leadership. It takes leadership. And I think it is the responsibility of the national governments, including my own government, to take responsibility of their own people. And that creates environment and atmosphere to attract other partners to come into play. When I arrived in America, I keep on coming back to the issue of passion. Someone was telling me, James, you're going to America? You know, and I think he was assuming, he has never been here, saying, these are busy people who have no time for you, you know, it's high, you know. And I have to learn how to speak quickly so that they can understand, because they don't have time for that. I have never seen any culture that has time for people. They give their time for you. They pick you from the airport. You go and stay with them. They be around with you. And you think these people have nothing to do in their homes or offices. But they have time for you. I'll give you an example. When I went to New York in August, I had a conference to speak and come back to Washington. I didn't miss the plane, but it was cancelled because of the weather. And I was told for the first time I heard that a big city like New York was full, the hotels were full, and the motels were full. And I said to I went to the information desk, the hotel reservation. I said I wanted a hotel because my flight is cancelled. And this person said, New York is full, the hotels are full, and the motels are full. So, and then he said, so. Then I had to call the organizer and said, I'm stuck. No, I left the voice message because the phone was on voicemail. So trying to find my way out, I didn't remember that I had an ambassador in New York. I started calling him. He lives 1 hour away from Manhattan. So by the time he was getting back to me, I got the call from the organizer, Catherine, and she said, you know what, come to Hilton, you get your room. Very good. I told my ambassador, I got a room in Hilton. I'm going to stay there and leave early in the morning. So when I went, what happened? Catherine checked out and went to stay with a friend in Manhattan. And she checked out to give me a room. When I went to Iowa, I had booked my hotel. The president of one of the universities, I'm having dinner with the vice president this evening. When I arrived, he refused. He said, no, you're not going to stay in a hotel. Come and stay with me. I stay in his house. And when we went to the meeting, it was the convocation day, he declared 4 scholarships for 100 students after my speech. And then I started saying, but this person was lying to me. I think this is a different culture. They like people, they love people. You are so good, you are so passionate. And I really say, as a foreigner, my experience in this country is so fascinating. If I give you an example, this afternoon I have lunch with someone from Boston. They are supporting more than 150 students, orphans in our universities, just paying for their school fees to be able to access higher learning education, just from their own resources that they're trying to mobilize. So I think this is not out of, of the fact that this country is rich, that we have enough resources. It's out of conviction and believing that if you can work together, we shall be able to achieve the goal of saving the lives of people. AIDS pandemic, I have not talked about. I know many people have covered it, but for sure, if we form this strong and transparent and effective partnership, we shall be able to achieve our goals and deal with, I think Pastor Rick didn't have time to talk about the giants, and one of them is diseases, including AIDS, and I'm sure the partnership between the private sector and the church, whether you believe in Jesus Christ or to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or any other belief you have, if we work together, we are going to overcome that strong human catastrophe. And what we want to do is to move quickly, because as we speak today, as we conduct meetings, people are dying. And I remember our president was saying, there is a very common saying in Kinyarwanda that is called buhoro buhoro. If you go to Rwanda, buhoro buhoro is like slowly by slowly. When we had a meeting, the president would ask, when are you going to finish? Your Excellency, we shall finish buhoro buhoro. And then he would say, how do you afford to do things buhoro buhoro? You are poor, your people are suffering, your people are dying, and then you say you are doing. I don't want that vocabulary in our language. And then that's what people call the dictatorship. It's not a dictatorship. It's making people responsible for their own people. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I'm privileged to introduce another part of the Legion of Heroes we have out there. If the panel could come up, Heidi, Joanne, Reverend Hilson, there's Bob. Okay. We're going to start off this panel with Heidi Metcalf. You can look in your packages for specifics about their distinguished past and current activity. Heidi is Vice President of Geneva Global. Geneva Global is one of the New Partners Initiative grantees, the first of them. But long before the New Partners Initiative, they had begun what is an extraordinary business model to support local organizations to fight diseases and other things in their community. And I remember when Steve Beck, the director, was telling the president about this approach, and his eyes lit up, and the fact that they're using a business model to find local organizations in the community and build them up so that they can own their response in their community. So Heidi, pleased to hear from you. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Dybel, and it's a great privilege to speak to you all today and to give you a window into a current and innovative partnership. You know, I've only gotten 2 standing ovations before in my life after speaking, And I mean, I'm not expecting one today. I mean, unless I really wow you, and then if so, the check's in the mail. But those two ovations came when I was in Ivory Coast in Ethiopia, announcing PEPFAR's New Partners Initiative there. The Ivorians and Ethiopians weren't actually getting on their feet applauding me, but they were recognizing the commitment of the American people to share resources with them so that they in turn could then care for their countrymen and women. And I'm as excited to share with you today about the Geneva Global Model as I was to announce the possible funding to Ivorians and Ethiopians, because each of you in this room represents resources that can be unlocked to put to work through people who live and solve problems in the communities from which they come. It's a resource revolution. And so today I'm going to tell you about Geneva Global, about what our business model is, and one of the examples and partnerships that we are working with PEPFAR for, putting public and private resources to work to fight the HIV/AIDS pandemic. Geneva Global is a for-profit philanthropic advisory service. And we were started by a wealthy family that made significant resources in the emerging markets, and they wanted to give their money away in emerging markets. And so they went to go and get the same quality investment advice that they would when they buy companies for their philanthropy, to figure out how can we get the greatest return on our investment. They couldn't get anybody to give them that kind of information. So we were created originally to serve that family, to identify projects, to do due diligence on the risks and potential returns of organizations, as well as manage grant transactions and do monitoring and evaluation. And then we began to provide those same services for other donors. And today we focus on high net worth individuals, foundations, corporations, and then for any of those donors who are interested in leveraging those resources in brokering public-private partnerships. So our founders had a passion to grant well themselves, but also to change the whole philanthropic market. And as has been referenced this morning, you know that the philanthropic market in the US is huge. It is a massive $260 billion, largely non-rational capital market. And charitable dollars often go to the saddest stories and to the people best connected to the resources, but not necessarily to the projects who effectively make change. But a rational investor would invest their philanthropy where they could get the greatest return. And so, by definition, this would drive all of us to community and faith-based organizations at the grassroots in the developing world, where the needs are the greatest and where the potential returns are also the greatest. Of course, this is hard to do. There's an opacity of information, there's a lack of trust, and you can't always get a tax deduction to do that. And this is where Geneva Global as an intermediary comes in. We're an intermediary with a vision to unleash people's desires and resources to make a positive difference in the world. And we aim to be the most effective intermediary of philanthropic capital in the world. And our mission is to promote prosperity among the poor by connecting investors to the most effective life-changing programs in the world. At a glance, Geneva Global has seen since in the last 7 years, almost 6 million lives changed, from $60 million of grants that have been intermediated to 1,400 projects in 114 different countries, through a worldwide staff and a local project origination network of 400 people. We work in 3 sectors of expertise. We're right at that middle on that slide of between the donor, the implementer, and the beneficiary, the intermediary to unlock those projects. I mentioned that we currently have 3 sectors of expertise in which we can advise donors, and I want to focus today on health. You'll see the others on the slide. But since 2003, Geneva's brokered over $8.3 million to 241 community-based efforts addressing HIV/AIDS in 30 different countries, positively impacting over 1 million lives. Ambassador Dybel mentioned that the WHO estimated that between 30 and 70% of all healthcare delivery is done by faith-based organizations. Of course, they don't receive 30 to 70% of the resources. And Geneva's due diligence process is merit-based. And as we began to do the due diligence on partners in sub-Saharan Africa, we discovered not only how much resources were needed for the people carrying out the work, but how successful and effective community and faith-based organizations were at carrying out this work. So we'd been intermediating HIV/AIDS grants for several years when the New Partners Initiative was announced, and with an NPI, we saw a great opportunity for our donors to leverage their resources. And there was such kinship between the spirit of NPI and the work of Geneva Global that we put forward several proposals in response to the RFP. And ultimately, we received the opportunity to manage $12 million in public and private dollars into grassroots programs in those two countries. And I mentioned that this was a co-investment. We had a private equity donor that was so enthusiastic about this opportunity that they put forward $4 million to then pool with another $8 million from PEPFAR to create a $12 million fund. $9 million of that 12 will go to Ethiopia over the course of 3 years. But we've made several promises to PEPFAR in exchange for their resources, and let me tell you about some of those results in progress. We promised to identify 30 new partners in Ethiopia and another group in Ivory Coast, but I'm going to just talk to you about Ethiopia. They've all been identified and vetted, and funding has begun to go to them. Over 90% of those organizations are truly grassroots. The other 3 organizations are national NGOs. We promised to build the capacity of those new partners so that they might actually themselves begin to compete for funding from other bilateral and multilateral institutions and donors. And of immediate import, we promised through those implementing organizations to impact the lives of 500,000 or more Ethiopians through prevention and care services. Just quickly, there are 3 really important lessons that we've learned when it comes to working with community-based organizations. Our Ethiopian research team has really had to test hard whether these groups are truly community-based, because success on all levels really hinges on that reality. National networks like the Evangelical Fellowship of Ethiopia can play a significant role in identifying and shepherding a lot smaller organizations. And then the third is that working with grassroots organizations can be messy, it can be costly, and it can be time-consuming. But the benefits that you engage in engaging local people and it creates long-lasting and meaningful change in that elusive sustainability that we continue to go after. And it's also great public diplomacy, by the way. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Going to Heidi's right, we have Dr. Joanne Line, who's president of World Hope, and she'll introduce Reverend Mike Hilson, who's the senior pastor at New Life Wesleyan Church. We've talked about World AIDS Days a couple times. Joanne actually has been with the president for the last 2. First as one of the first recipients of a New Partners Initiative, and then to tell him a little bit about it. So welcome back, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you. His name is Abson. Abson represents the 21st century phenomena of child-headed households in Africa. Abson, his home is southern Zambia, a rural area, the village Mochi Papa. Abson had 2 sisters and 2 brothers who were older than he. The sisters turned to prostitution, the brothers turned to crime, and they were gone. Abson found himself alone. There was a train that came through from Lusaka to Choma on down to Livingston, and he noticed that and one day thought that might be a good place to live. So Abson found himself on a train, finding food if he could. They would kick him off the train, he would jump back on, and that's how Abson lived for 2 years. One day Abson made his way back to his home community, Mochi Papa, and he was stunned when he walked into the community. It was alive. There was economic development. There was a well. There were chickens. The people were handling the chickens in a business-like fashion. And he went to the pastor and said, "What has happened?" The pastor said, "There's been a resurrection." And part of that resurrection happened because of PEPFAR funds. And through the local agencies with which we, World Hope, have been working, we were a sub-grantee for PEPFAR funds. Also, as a result of PEPFAR funds, we were able to leverage $2 to $1 PEPFAR funds to build the entire community and to begin to work. Our local staff, keep this in mind, it's the local people who are doing this with whom we are working and partnering. Abson had always wanted to go to school, and so the first thing he asked the pastor, "Am I able to go to school now?" And the pastor proudly told him that all the orphans and vulnerable children in that community were now going to school. And Abson went to school. I met Abson this last August as I visited this community, along with 52 other communities in southern Zambia with which we are working, that represent 10,000 AIDS and orphan and vulnerable children in these communities, as well as palliative care that's taking place for thousands of people. I saw when I was first in Zambia a few months earlier, or a year earlier, there were no ARVs. But now, when I was there in August, I was thrilled to see literally the Lazarus effect. And I'd never seen this before. I thought somebody's exaggerating. But a woman that I had met in January who asked for prayer that she might be able to live long enough to take care of her children. Her arms were that big around her. Hand was very warm as I touched it. And I thought my prayer was, it didn't have much faith, Pastor Rick. I just sort of said it and thought, I don't know what's going to happen. But I'm back there 9 months later with our local staff. And they're thrilled to introduce me to her because this local home-based care person has been putting him on the back of his bicycle, taking her 20 kilometers to get ARVs. And now she was taking care of her children. Yes, an answer to that prayer, that I did not have much faith but saw what happened. Abson just finished secondary school, passed his exams with high honors, and has now received a full scholarship to the university to study accounting. This is part of what PEPFAR is doing. And in Zambia, we are a sub-grantee. We have a goal of 200 villages that will encompass some 50,000 AIDS orphans and vulnerable children. And we believe we can do that with PEPFAR and with the matching $2 more per dollar that we find. So I'm open, anybody here. And as Ambassador Dybel said, we received the NPI last year, and that NPI is in Haiti. Haiti, the forgotten country. In our back door, most of us have given up on Haiti. But I'm here to tell you that 6 local agencies with whom we are working have not. These are local groups that literally, some of them have been in existence for 10 years and have literally used their own resources and a few resources that they could find. And as we have begun to work with them as the intermediary for those 6 agencies, we found first that all their bookkeeping was on paper. But I'm here to tell you that after a few months, they now know how to do QuickBooks. And it's upgraded. And the capacity is growing wonderfully. These are people that have had been respected throughout the entire country. And in fact, during one of the hurricanes, one of them had gone to the city of, my French is not very good, Ambassador, Carrefour. And they had helped them in the hurricane. So when they went back, this is a very remote village in Haiti. And when they went in, they couldn't believe people were dying in their community, and they did not know why. They thought it was voodoo. And they were now introduced to the fact that it was HIV/AIDS. That entire community, and I think this is in our back door, and this just happened 2 months ago. And they came back, the people came for testing. Please test us. Please tell us what to do. Those are some opportunities that we have. And our targets are some 20,000 people to be tested and some total of 100,000 to work with in Haiti. A couple years ago, Bono made the statement at the National Prayer Breakfast, if the church doesn't help with the crisis in Africa, who will? Well, I have been preaching that all over the country, making all churches feel guilty, but getting them on board. And so we have about 2,000 churches now working with us. And I'm pleased. They're from this small remote church or rural churches in North Dakota that are saying, yes, we want to help, to large metropolitan churches. And I'm here to introduce Mike Hilson, who is one of our partners with us in the work that we're doing. And I think it's kind of in the words of Jeffrey Sachs that we are creating mighty currents of hope to heal a world.
I have to say, as I sat over there and for the past couple of days, as I've known I'm going to be here, I had no clue why I was coming here. Joanne asked me to come, and I knew who would be here, and I knew that you would be great leaders in business and nonprofit organizations and World Health organizations, and Pastor Rick and Kay, who pastor a planet, and I just pastor a church. That's really all I do, and. But it dawns on me that in order to reach Joanne's Absam, you have to reach my Bill. And in order to reach my Bill, there are some things that are going to have to be true. Joanne and World Hope and many of the other organizations I'm hearing of here are accomplishing those things. There are 3 things we look for in order to bring people from our pews and bring them out. Number 1 is we absolutely want indigenous leadership. There are church organizations, there are temples, there are mosques, there are synagogues that exist in every community on the planet. They need to be tapped into and used because the help and the resources you need will exist inside of those communities, inside of those buildings. Likewise, we want to see that we have a way to go in and do a short-term project with our people because we can't take them there for years and we can't stay there. We're not a governmental organization that can employ people to stay there. So we need a short-term project that yields long-term results. And lastly, we need something that is not a vacation. We need to send our people here, and we need, as Kay described so eloquently just a moment ago, we need them to be crushed. When I took Bill, I told Bill when I left, and I told Joanne, I said, I want you to pray for this guy. He's a business owner. I said, I want you to pray for him. And here's what I want you to pray. I want you to pray that God will crush him. Because when he gets there, he's going to experience a world he's never seen before. And God did. God broke his heart. And that man now single-handedly sponsors a village in Zambia where we work. And he then is working with his friends and partners in business to bring others to the table. The truth is, the church in America, I do believe that the church in America and the faith-based community in America desperately wants to be further involved. And why am I here? I think I figured it out sitting over there. I think I'm here because I'm your target audience. And the truth is that in order to reach us, all you need to show us is something that's locally led. Don't want to see Americans running things in other countries anymore. Show us something that is functional and will impact our people. And in the end, I believe the church and the synagogues and all the faith-based organizations will step up if you'll simply show us something that works like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor, and we're so delighted that you're here. We've talked about the New Partners Initiative, and the first 3 speakers are affiliated with that. I think you see what the New Partners Initiative is. It wasn't new organizations. It was new partners to the government. People are already out there touching lives, but who had not accessed resources from the government. We're ending with the anchor of the panel, but in many ways also an anchor for development programs. We need new partners if we're going to tackle this epidemic, but we also need our old partners, our tried and true partners, and World Vision has been there for years as an important partner in the fight against many things, including HIV/AIDS. And we're delighted that we can have as the last speaker someone representing an organization who is one of those anchor organizations without which many, many lives would not have been touched and saved.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador Dybel, and thank you. It's nice to be with you today. I just want to affirm the importance of partnerships, what people have said. It's easy to say the importance of working together, but it's really hard work. And you need to really make it intentional and part of your strategic plans. Take the U.S. government. The U.S. government cannot solve global AIDS alone. It's large, one of the wealthiest nations in the world. They can't do it. Ambassador Dybel can't do it alone. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, one of the most wealthiest men in the world, cannot solve this alone. The church cannot solve this alone, and wealthy businesses cannot solve this alone. World Vision, a large NGO, cannot solve this alone. So we must have partnerships. So I want to give you an example of what I consider one of our best cases, of an example where they've pulled these different communities together. We tend to speak here, we're at the White House, we're in a government entity, of what governments, the United Nations, large institutions can do. Let's reverse it. How does the household deal with global AIDS? How does the household struggle? If you are a mother or father and a child becomes sick, what do? You might sell assets. You might cope with this. You're coping with a variety of things: lack of job, healthcare problems, AIDS, malaria, not clean water. How are you coping as a household? How do these organizations walk alongside the household? Partner with families, partner with people who are caring. How do you do that? In many cases, it is those community leaders. So you start with community leaders and faith-based organizations. I want to give an example of a program called Rapids. It is in Zambia. It was through Ambassador Dybel and the Office of Global AIDS Coordinator that started this. It is a partnership of 6 large NGOs. World Vision is the lead. Our partners are Africare, Catholic Relief Services, CARE, Zambian Expanded Church Response, and the Salvation Army. Part of the goal is how do you reduce overhead? How do you increase efficiency? Let's not reinvent the wheel. These organizations were already in 52 of the 72 districts in Zambia. No need to reinvent the wheel. They're there. They can manage large sums of money, and so they're there. So let's work with them. These 6 organizations have 100 local partners. They are churches. They are community-based organizations. So we partner and empower the sustainability. So we're trying to walk alongside the household, walk alongside community leaders to deal with the challenge of orphans and vulnerable children. Given the infrastructure, which was funded through the Office of Global AIDS Coordinator, we have 15,000 volunteer African caregivers who are going into homes saying, how can I help you? How can I walk alongside? But that then leverages different partners. For example, there has been a business that donated bicycles, 1 bicycle for each caregiver. Bicycle is a huge economic resource in Zambia. Small businesses can start around that. Now these caregivers have a bicycle to go and meet those households where they're at. Well, they have a bicycle. Another pharmaceutical company donated deworming medicines. The deworming medicines now, the caregiver goes into their households and they are helping to make sure there is no problems with that. Another example, Hasbro is a toy company. They've donated trucks and supplies and toys for kids. So they partner with that. Churches in the United States can assemble a caregiver kit with products that is donated from either bought or purchased, simple things like aspirin or stuff you might have, at your home for general care. Then it's donated, assembled here maybe at churches or corporations from the back of a bicycle and delivered to one of those 250,000 homes that are being cared. You can scale up different funding aspects. Right now it's using 3 different silos of U.S. government money. There is the silo on orphans and vulnerable children care. There's the silo on abstinence, be faithful, and youth and behavior change. And there's a silo on malaria bed nets. 3 different government silos pulled into this program. Initially, the government investment from the Office of Global AIDS Coordinator was more than doubled through private resources. So there's opportunities there. And Jesus taught us that the 2 greatest commandments was to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and all your strength. The second was to love your neighbor as yourself. And I believe as working together, and which is hard, we love each other in different organizations, but the goal is to serve. It is to serve these households. And by so doing, we bring glory to God. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the whole panel. We've talked a little bit about World AIDS Day. I hope everyone saw on World AIDS Day this year, there was a 44-foot red ribbon, the first time ever, actually, that hung in front of the White House, a huge symbol of the compassion and generosity of the American people, a huge symbol of the compassion and generosity of the President and First Lady who live in that building. But behind that ribbon, behind that building, and behind the President and First Lady are a legion of extraordinary people in that building, and Jay Hine is one of them, who lives the President's prescription to whom much is given, much is required, and lives that compassion and generosity. So we should all thank Jay before the day is over.
Thank you all very much. Appropriately, the nation's consciousness has been raised about a pandemic in Africa and a global disease that's ravaging developing countries all over the world. One of the unintended consequences of that spike in attention has been a lessening, I think, of attention on the domestic AIDS issue, which continues to ravage too many of our neighbors. While that has occurred, I think it may be a public awareness space that has not led to a diminished effort toward that disease, to prevent and to treat and to care. And so I'm privileged now to introduce the next panel that will tell us that story and describe that work in action. Marty McGeehan will chair this panel. She has the distinct advantage of me not knowing any personal kind of anecdotes about her, so she gets to escape the setup. But she is Principal Deputy Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at the United States Department of Health and Human Services. And notable for today's event, she is Executive Director of the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV and AIDS, which provides program and policy recommendations to the President and across the government on how we can better respond to this epidemic. Before her government service, she represented leadership roles in the health sector, both at a large national association, also as a nurse manager on the ground. So she comes well prepared to deliver remarks and to moderate the next panel.
I'm not sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Thank you, Jay, very much, and thank you, all of our honored guests. I am delighted to be here this afternoon. I actually came to sort of lay the groundwork for what HHS, I can't see over this podium, but I know Pastor Rick is out there, one leg of the stool called government. Ambassador Diebold is one part of it. The Department of Health and Human Services is another. For those of you who don't know these statistics, they're pretty grim. There's over 1 million people living with HIV/AIDS, 25% of whom are unaware of their infection. African Americans are disproportionately affected, accounting for 49% of the HIV/AIDS diagnoses in '05. Since 2001, the administration has devoted over $80 billion to the domestic AIDS care and treatment program, in addition to $18 billion for HIV/AIDS research. There are major program areas on HIV at HHS: prevention, care and treatment, biomedical and behavior research, vaccine development and clinical trials, disease surveillance, substance abuse prevention and treatment, mental health services, public health evaluation. We are trying very hard to cover this disease from every possible aspect. On prevention, education, and HIV testing, since 1996, the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, has worked with faith-based organizations to make them part of the HIV prevention efforts, providing resources including capacity-building assistance and training programs for faith leaders whose communities have high rates of HIV. In February 2006, CDC held a two-day meeting on faith and HIV prevention to expand CDC's partnership with faith communities. In the care and treatment area, we have the Ryan White Treatment Modernization Act. It used to be called the Ryan White Care Act, which is what it still rolls off my tongue. That is handled by the Health Resources Service Administration, the HIV/AIDS Bureau. It oversees the Ryan White Care Act, which has a commitment of $2.2 billion of federal resources to fund a national network of over 2,400 providers delivering services to over 500,000 people a year. HIV drugs are delivered via the Ryan White program to 147,000 people each year through Ryan White's section called ADAP. Today, for those of you who are more focused on domestic than international, we are happy, gleeful almost, to report that there are no waiting lists to receive services from state ADAP programs anywhere in the United States. This is the result of a very well organized reauthorization of Ryan White Care Act, and it's a result of the excellent administration that HRSA is doing on this program. That applause is really for the president. It was his initiative that got woven into the reauthorization. The Ryan White program delivers primary care and support services to many areas, from case management to substance abuse to care and treatment and other services, including child care, transportation for women who are HIV infected and have nowhere else to put their children except to bring them with for treatment. On the substance abuse and mental health services, we have an agency called SAMHSA. That doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. It's the HHS Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. It has faith-based initiatives that provides regional training sessions and has funded 70 sub-awards to faith-based organizations and their drug-free community coalitions. Most of you probably know that drug abuse is a comorbidity with HIV, and 15 subawards to faith-based organization to provide testing and referral service to the prison reentry problem which you mentioned in your opening remarks. And SAMHSA's Center for Substance Abuse Prevention, CSAP, it's the government, we like acronyms, has provided funding to faith-based and community organizations to address HIV/AIDS primarily to build capacity in minority communities for sustained, effective efforts to combat substance abuse and HIV/AIDS. Before I go on, let me introduce, hopefully they're still in the room, some of the terrific people. These are government employees who actually had these programs. Is Dr. Parham still here? Dr. If you'll stand up, please. Dr. Parham runs the HIV/AIDS Bureau at HRSA. Is Dr. Watts-Davis still here? She runs the program at SAMHSA. And is Dr. Fenton still here? He is. He runs the program at CDC. And we have Christopher Bates, who runs the Office of HIV/AIDS Policy in the Department of Health and Human Services. I just do the talking. They do all of the work, all of the work. We have a variety of, HHS has a variety of partnerships with community-based organizations and faith-based organizations, helping the federal government reach out to populations at greatest risk for HIV. These partnerships both help the organization and the government to craft effective HIV prevention, testing, and treatment messages for at-risk individuals and groups. What we have discovered is that some of our messages are either not being heard or not being understood. And so one of the things that we are working with our partners, and Miguel Gomez is there shaking his head because most of you probably know him, he is also very instrumental in this, is trying to craft the message so people both hear, take it to their heart, and take the action that's required. Be tested, find out your status. Our goal has been to encourage conversations among community and faith-based organizations and public health leaders. This is not something the government can do. We really is a three-legged stool. The result has been faith-based and community-based programs that have achieved successful results. For example, the National Coalition of Pastor Spouses serves approximately 2,500 African-American women in churches across the nation. The coalition worked with HHS to produce a faith-based manual on HIV prevention for African-American churches. That manual has now been used to provide scientifically accurate information. Pastor Kay, accurate information, because there's a lot of misinformation out there on HIV prevention in faith-based settings around the country. Esperanza USA strengthens Hispanic faith-based organizations through capacity building, operates national programs addressing the Hispanic community's needs, and works as an intermediary with government agencies. They have worked with HHS to encourage Hispanic faith leaders to address stigma and to encourage HIV testing. The Salvation Army is one of the nation's largest provider of services to the poor and has an enormous impact on the communities in America at most risk for HIV infection. As a consequence of their work with the HHS Office of HIV/AIDS Policy, which Christopher and Miguel share leadership in, and the Leadership Campaign on AIDS, the Salvation Army is now developing an HIV program in all of its national territories. This is a huge step forward. Many other organizations, some of whom are represented today, have worked with us and significantly helped to extend HHS's efforts in the HIV prevention, care, and treatment. We still have some challenges. We can't make this epidemic go away, although I believe, we would like to believe, that we are right now, it's going to stop with us. This is the last generation of new cases we're going to see. Stigma is a huge issue. Engaging the faith community to help break the silence about HIV. It doesn't happen always to somebody else. It sometimes actually happens to us. Expanding the pool of partners. Encouraging organizations to apply for grants and federal partnerships. All of the agencies that I've mentioned today stand ready and willing to provide technical assistance. For those of you who go, apply a federal grant? No way. It's not that hard. It can be done. We're making advances in the fight against HIV/AIDS, but have not yet found a way to bring faith leaders fully into the fight. We need faith leaders to address the stigma that continues to allow HIV to spread. We also need them to address the false sense of public security that because of we now have treatments, because of advances in research, that this disease is taken care of. It's a done deal. It is not a done deal. It continues to spread. HHS and its partners must continue our work to increase awareness about the disease and prevent HIV infection rather than rely on treating our way out of the epidemic. We cannot treat our way out of this epidemic. As I close, I want to give recognition to the persons, I'm not trying to get through this, to the persons in the room, to the many others of you who are not here. Since the beginning of the epidemic, members of the faith community have been there for its victims, providing meals, serving as hospice volunteers, taking people to doctors and hospitals. You were there tending the flock when others turned away. I personally want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you've done and all you're doing. And while you feel your work may go unrecognized, please be assured it is recognized and deeply appreciated. Thank you. Okay, deep breath. I would like to call our next panel to the stage, Dr. Hamad and Ms. Cheryl Lynn Hall. Thank you. Dr. Hamad, why don't you tell us what Access does and what your role in it is?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here before all these nice and decent colleagues in the combat against AIDS HIV in our communities. I was very touched with this initiative. I'm also the first time in the White House, like yourself, and I feel very great, as a matter of fact, talking before you about my own story to fight AIDS HIV in the Arab and Muslim communities. When I immigrated to this country for 15 years ago, I really never saw that I will be combating with AIDS HIV. I'm an epidemiologist, public health professional who always knew that his mission in life is to fight diseases and make people live and to prevent these diseases and to promote health. But 20 years ago, when we first started disseminating information about AIDS HIV, and we put this information in terms of brochures and pamphlets in our local mosques and supermarkets and the community at large, when we went the next morning, we found them all burned. Not a single piece was in its place. Even it was not thrown in the trash because they have to be wiped out. AIDS HIV is associated with sinners, with people who do not obey God, and with people who are not following the right path. It is a disease that is full of stigma and barriers. Ladies and gentlemen, now we screen for AIDS HIV in our local mosques. This is how we went through the journey of fighting for the lives of our community. Through these 20 or 23 years, we really came so slow, but we broke through slowly and steadily. And this is what it takes to fight an epidemic like AIDS HIV. This is what it takes to fight a killer like AIDS HIV in the Arab and Muslim communities. Our partnership with the Department of Health and Human Services leadership on AIDS has been so great in the last 5 to 7 years, because through their resources, through their vision and guidance, we were able to create Arab and Muslim coalitions where we sat with imams and brought them around the table, 13 of them, in 2005. And those imams came to the understanding that they are also ready to counsel patients with AIDS, HIV. That was too far even to be perceived that it could be true. Access, the organization I represent, is a human service agency that was established in 1970 to serve Arab and Muslim communities. Now it serves the whole community. Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Africans, whites, everybody. And we are very happy to be working with you in the fight against AIDS, HIV, and I really hope that our breakthrough would be another good experience for other Arab and Muslim communities in the United States and in the Arab world and in the Muslim world to learn from this very good experience. And thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Hall.
My name is Cheryl Hall, and my title is deceiving in that this booklet. I think what I am is a foot soldier in a war to eradicate HIV/AIDS and to make sure we take steps to deal with stigma and discrimination and begin to look at HIV/AIDS as a chronic disease. I wanted to share probably share some information as a model we used in Brooklyn, New York. Lutheran Family Health Center is one of the largest federally qualified health centers in the country. And when we decided to develop a Caribbean health center, we partnered with a community agency who had been in the community for a very long time, for 25 years. We were new to that community, and we had to, since we're community oriented, we had to work with the communities. And I'll just share statistics with you. Over 70% of Caribbeans who migrate to the USA come to Brooklyn. And after they're grounded, then they take off to other parts of the USA. So we developed a community health, we developed a health center, and shortly thereafter we got a community access grant. Once we got the grant, we were going to work in the community to make sure people had access to care and to develop an insurance program with them. The first thing I did is I hired a faith-based community, because in East Flatbush, while most of you may have the luxury of working with big churches, we have a few big churches, but many, many, many small storefront operations. So you had to have someone dedicated to just working with the faith-based community. And she went out, and we had breakfasts, and we figured out how we could engage the faith-based community. I had a product to offer, and we were telling them we're going to improve the health of the community. At the same time, and some people who've worked with me know I beg a lot, I heard that Pfizer was giving away their old computers. They change computers every 2 to 3 years. So I went up to Pfizer, got the old computers, put on some software, and went out to all the churches. I now had something to give to the churches. They wanted to listen to me. So we delivered the product. And when you go to churches, especially the storefront you're going to work with the kids or the young adults. They don't have secretaries and the works. So we started training them, and they became so enthusiastic about getting insurance for the parents. They then decided they wanted to do something more. So we said, I begged for another grant. And we decided we were going to build websites and keep them busy, keep them involved. And when we started to choose topics to put on this website, the word HIV/AIDS started coming up quite often. We were going to let them do all this research and put it on a website. So I was dealing with the faith-based organizations with asthma, diabetes, hypertension. I had insurance to offer, but I didn't know how to go forward with HIV/AIDS, and just then, when we saw that the children were interested in finding out information on HIV/AIDS, we called the faith-based community together, and again, we were able to begin that discussion. And in the essence of time, we continued a collaboration, working with them. I sent my medical director out every Sunday to speak to the faith-based from the pulpit, knowing fully well that the next time they invited us, they were going to be willing to talk about HIV/AIDS. So that's how we continued to infiltrate, quote unquote, the community. Once we talked to a pastor, and you'd understand this, and we said, we'd like to talk about AIDS on the pulpit. He says, nobody in my church is positive. And we said to him, let's do it anyway. And from the pulpit, we saw 2 of our patients positive. They couldn't share with him because he felt nobody was positive. So he began to learn anything there was to learn about HIV/AIDS, and he has been our champion in helping us to push this forward. He organized pastors testing. He organized anything to do with AIDS. He's right with us. He has just asked a New York State senator to form a task force in which he is championing. So I share that with you to say there's a way that you can work. We work in a grassroots way to work with the community, the faith-based organizations, because that's the community we serve. At Lutheran, we're a designated AIDS center. We get, we're in New York State, we have ADAP funding. We have the funding, so we go out into the community, we get the people in, and we treat them. And as a Lutheran church, that's what we're supposed to do. Our mission is to serve the people. So I say that, and I see we're out of time. I'll say some of the lessons we learn. The faith-based organizations must take the lead and become champions for change in our communities if we are to continue to address this pandemic. And from the Lutheran Church, I'll share a quote we use quite often: our work, God's hands. Thank you.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Wonderfully successful models. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You will notice, those of you following along in the game day program, that Bonnie Camarda is with the Salvation Army of Greater Philadelphia. She was scheduled to be on that panel. She was home ill, unfortunately, and unable to join us. You can read about her program in our guide, and as you heard from Marty's words, they have a plethora of partners attacking the disease and advancing great solutions. So thank you all for your stories. We have the ideal person to bring us home because we have somebody that will speak to both the public and private dimensions of our work that's at least embodied in her career. Dana Cade is Executive Vice President of ONE, the Campaign to Make Poverty History, which, as you know, was founded by Bono. But prior to her current post, she held senior government positions here at the White House in George W. Bush's administration and on Capitol Hill as a member, senior official in the National Security Council. Dana was very involved in laying the policy groundwork of the President's participation in the G8 summit. And both in her work at the National Security Council and at the State Department and on the Hill, she's been heavily invested in thinking through policy solutions and international finance to promote development and to grow, end poverty by growing economies and prosperity. Now she's putting that together in an advocacy role and in a policy role that from the outside continues to enable her to have an important voice in the debate and strengthen an organization that has such an important role in this work. So Dana, welcome to the podium, and please.
Thank you. We've heard a lot about compassion today, and in my own gesture of compassion, I took a heavy editing pen to my remarks. So as I see we're getting behind schedule, and it's already after 5 o'clock. I know everyone's anxious to get home to their families. You can read more about the ONE campaign, which I'm just thrilled to be a part of in the program.
I will say that I was originally drawn to then Governor Bush, primarily because of his compassionate conservatism. And I've been quite privileged to witness firsthand that compassion and to see how that compassion translates into public policy from several different vantage points in the administration. But there's still a huge chasm between the scale of the problem and the scale of the response thus far. We as a country can do more, not just in terms of development assistance, but ordinary people, NGOs, the business community, and our government hand in hand, as we've seen and heard today some wonderful examples of that. As all of you know, in Southeast Asia, we responded when 150,000 people lost their lives in the tsunami. In Africa alone, we see the equivalent of a tsunami in terms of lives lost every month. I realize that nobody in this room needs to be persuaded of the magnitude of the problem. The question is, what will we together do about it? I would submit to you that we have nearly everything we need to save lives and alleviate senseless suffering, particularly among the world's most vulnerable. We have the information, we have the technology, and we have the financial means. What we don't have enough of is the political will. Despite the leadership of this president, we still don't have enough political will. And that's why the One Campaign exists, to raise awareness of the problem, increase our grassroots presence through sheer numbers, and then mobilize those members. We have 2.4 million members, 160 organizations, NGOs that we partner with. We want to make that 2.4 million number mean something by mobilizing them to make sure that they're members of Congress, senators, and presidential candidates hear loud and clear that voters care about these issues. And we have polling data that show that that is the case. The One Campaign has several key initiatives, which I won't get into here, but one of those signature initiatives is One Vote 08. It's an unprecedented bipartisan campaign chaired by former Senate Majority Leaders Bill Frist and Tom Daschle. Unlike many issues in this campaign that we see every day on our television, unlike many issues that divide Republicans and Democrats so sharply along partisan lines, One Vote 08 brings people together. We've organized tens of thousands of One members in the very early primary states alone, in the 4 early primary states alone. We believe that whoever's elected, Republican or Democrat, should be on the record, and we've pushed very hard to get them on the record in support of specific steps and commitments to address global health and poverty. We even have on our website, www.one.org, we have a section called On the Record where we can now compare what the different presidential candidates propose as specific plans to address poverty and global health issues. And then we intend to hold them accountable once they're in office. From the launch of One Vote 08 alone, we received 464 million media impressions. I highlight this initiative because we are getting results already, and we're seeing the potential for impacting the political system in a meaningful way, and in fact, I believe, an unprecedented way. We recognize also the value of the faith community. I personally share conviction that we all have an obligation to get out of the pews once we get off our knees and go into the world. We see the value that the faith community brings and its capacity to really change the world. Accordingly, we've launched an initiative called One Sabbath, an interfaith effort to get people to put their faith into action, working with Bread for the World and others who have focused on that mission for some time. Through these and many other initiatives that I could talk for ages about, the One Campaign has grown in a very short period of time. We're a new organization. We're only a few years old. We've grown to 2.4 million members, as I mentioned, 160 organizations that we're affiliated with, but it isn't enough. We need every one of you in this room, every one of your employees, every one of the members of your congregations, not just as members of One. One is not the movement in and of itself. But we do seek to put wind in the sails of the broader movement and to amplify the efforts of individuals and organizations that have poured their hearts and souls into these issues for decades. So joining One, of course, is something that we do seek to do. We do seek to increase our numbers. We'd like to double our membership as possible and the political muscle that goes with that. But I would encourage all of you and all the people that you represent in this room to engage in the broader movement, the broader community. All of us, I think, at government at all levels, the private sector, and ordinary Americans, shoulders to the wheel, can and must seize this unique moment in history. Thanks.
Well done. Thank you so much. You're an impressive group. Thank you for your patience throughout today's program. Went a little bit long, but it's been a good return, I'm sure, on your investment, because we were inspired, we were enlightened, we were educated. You are an impressive group. There's so many of you who have signaled out. I do want to point out another friend, important leader, Saeed, the director of the Islamic Society of North America. We appreciate you being here as well as each of you. And I wish you well. And we'll assemble a few of us up front if you want a bit of informal conversation. Otherwise, the interns and other staff will sort of guide you out of the building. You don't want to meet the Secret Service in an unfriendly way, I assure you. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
We have the
take one back for her.